If you only have a couple hours a week, how do you get the most out of your veggie garden? If you only ever have 10 or 20 minutes spare at a time, how do you put a sizable dent in the household grocery cost? Well, this is a problem nearly all modern gardeners run into, but no one ever really talks about, and I think I've finally found the answer. In this video, I'm going to give you a template for how to look after your garden with only a couple hours a week, and also the tools and knowledge to be able to modify it so that you can always make the most of every single minute that you have available in the garden. Now let's dig in. One of the most common issues I run into in the garden is when you come out and you've only got about a half an hour or so of time that you can spend in the garden, maybe between work and starting dinner, and then trying to decide what the most valuable thing you can be working on is, and you can almost end up in this state of decision paralysis and waste that entire window with not really knowing a clear direction of what you need to be doing in the garden. Well, this is the problem out of which I have invented what I now call the HARPS system, which is just a bit of an order of operations of garden activities so that you always know what the most important thing is, and then you always go down to the next thing on the list. The first one, H, is for harvest. Now, if you're anything like me, harvesting can almost feel like a bit of an afterthought in the garden. And this can be for a couple reasons. One of my main ones is I love the idea of trying to leave everything growing in the garden for as long as possible and then coming out just before creating a meal and then grabbing whatever I want to grab and then taking it inside. But the reality is it's pretty easy to miss harvest windows on a lot of crops, and if you do, all of your hard work is for nothing. So even if you don't want to use something for a meal today and it's ready to go, like all of these lettuces are starting to look like they're about to bolt, I need to start doing some serious harvesting on these or else they go and then I get no lettuce at all. So anytime you're coming out to the garden, you really do need to be doing a full scan to work out what is ready to go, and you just need to grab it out now and then task future you with the problem of trying to work out how to make sure you're using that produce without it going to waste. So like if I look at this cauliflower, trust me, we are not going to be using cauliflower anytime in the next couple of days, but this is ready to come out. If I don't grab it out now, then it's probably going to start to bolt and then I'm going to get no cauliflower. But this problem of harvesting too much is actually kind of part of the hobby of gardening anyway, and it's one of the funny full circle moments for myself with the garden, because one of the reasons that I really started to get back into veggie gardening about 5 or so years ago after a bit of a break is that I wanted to start eating way healthier. I wanted to make sure that I always had fresh produce to come out and grab at lunchtime and that sort of thing. And then now that I grow too much, you start to find some really fun ways to use all these veggies and your diet suddenly improves really quickly. Like, we now make heaps of popcorn cauliflower, which don't knock it till you try it.
This is the last one. I thought I better show you the crunch. Air fryer.
It's like the most flavorful thing. It's still super healthy. It's like guilt-free chicken wings. But that's probably what this is going to get turned into, because it's time to pull it out. I would normally do that over a bucket or a compost, but I figured it'd look better if I do it here. Now that we've harvested any veggies that are ready, we are well on our way to saving a whole bunch of time in our garden, so it's probably time to start thinking about picking up another hobby. Like recently, our household has been absolutely cuckoo for crochet. I made this beanie and a couple of half scarves, but Mrs. Culinary has really gone crazy with the stuff. She's made stuffed toys, yes, they're all Pokemon, a dice bag, a blanket, a better beanie, and it all started with this video's sponsor, Craftsy. Craftsy is this awesome online platform that is jam-packed full of video courses and articles and guides for every kind of arts and crafts activity that you could possibly think of, from crochet to knitting, embroidery, painting, photography, gardening. It even has some really niche stuff. I've been trying to learn heaps more about astrophotography, and I think some of my photos have been kind of okay, but I thought the editing was lacking. So I searched astrophotography editing, and there was actually a whole 6-part course on just astrophotography editing, and it took my photos from this to this, which is still not perfect, but hey, I'm learning. And trust me, I more than anyone appreciate that we are all broke and definitely do not need another streaming service in our life. And that's one of the reasons that I think Craftsy is so awesome, is that you can get your first 12 months of the service for only $1.49. That's not per month, that's $1.49 for the year. And in 2025, that's like an economic miracle. Unfortunately, that will only apply to the first 1,000 people to sign up to Craftsy using the link in my description, so make sure you get in quick. Thank you so much to Craftsy for sponsoring this video. This beanie is actually so comfy. I would wear it for the rest of the video if it wasn't just it's so like clumpy at the top and I don't know how to fix it. Now, after you've made sure you've harvested anything that's ready, the next is probably what you might have expected to be first on this, and that is A for add water. Now, what I would say to this though, I think where some beginners could really go wrong with adding water is if you are really limited on time, it's really tempting to kind of just give your garden the once over, hit everything once with almost a superficial amount of water. Because if you're hosing down a part of your garden, it can look quite wet and look like you've given it a pretty good soaking after only 30 seconds or so. But if you then go to the next step of just poking down in the soil a little bit, you'll realize how dry underneath that can get. And what I would recommend doing is, especially during the hotter months, err towards the side of trying to give one area of the garden a really deep watering as opposed to only giving a little bit to everything, because that will usually evaporate quite quickly and you've ended up making next to no meaningful difference to your garden, especially where your plants are concerned. If you're short on time, this is an area where it probably is really smart to make a decent investment into something that will help you water your garden without you actively just standing there with a hose. Sprinkler heads, soaker hoses, proper irrigation systems. You don't have to go the full shebang where you are setting up automatic timers or anything. Just something where you can connect your hose to it and leave it on while you go and do something else will save your garden so much during those hotter months. Especially because if you have kind of bad water pressure like mine, I can legitimately spend maybe 2 hours a day alone hand watering my garden, and it still is only about enough to be a bit of a maintenance water on it. And fertilizing is something that I would add into this add water step, because it's something that you only have to do every couple of weeks if you are using a liquid fertilizer, every couple of months if you're using a granular fertilizer. It's really easy to just add an extra couple of glugs of liquid fertilizer to a watering can and then continue on with your watering routine. And it doesn't really add any extra time to the amount of time that it takes to water, but it will make a huge difference to your garden. Your plants will love it. Now, after harvesting and adding water, the next one is a bit of a fun way to give you some behind the scenes of how nearly every culinary garden camera shot starts, which is me walking over, sitting down or standing in my spot that I'm gonna talk to camera, and then, noticing something that, I should probably just, while I'm here, just quickly pull that out. The R stands for remove weeds. Once you start to get into the rhythm of gardening a bit, weeds really aren't anywhere near as much of a problem as what you sort of think they're going to be when you first start gardening. And also usually because I think the way that most people start a garden is you first need to deal with just a whole bunch of weeds, and then you can maybe build your garden bed on top or next to or reuse an old garden bed. But really, once you have a bed established, weeding isn't that big of an issue. Hand weeding takes so not very long to actually get through. And even then, I usually will leave a lot of the baby weeds around because it's just not worth the extra time to go and try and pick through every single little weed. It's just that once they're getting to this bigger size to where they might start actually, well, one, going to seed, and you never want to let a weed go to flower, go to seed. It'll really help increase your weed pressure and the weed population around this area of the garden. But it's also once they start to get a bit bigger where they can start to actually suck mainly sunlight and of course nutrients from the nearby plants that you're actually trying to grow. So when you only have limited time, just come and remove all of the big ones, the ones that start to look pretty threatening, because in reality, weeds do play a really important role in your garden's soil ecosystem. Usually weeds are a sign of there's not enough planted in that area, and they help to just add an extra little bit of life to the soil, which is something extra that the microbes can feed on and continue to live there while that bit of soil is waiting for something else to get planted there. Or hello, Suki. And here's my beginner-friendly advice or guide to disposing of weeds. Throw it over your neighbor's fence. No, I'm kidding. Anything that is already flowering or going to seed, or Also, if you're pulling any grass out of your garden beds that has runners, anything that looks like it's got roots or a growth node on it, I just chuck that straight in the green waste bin. I don't think for beginners it's worth trying to make sure that you're getting your compost hot enough to be able to neutralize and kill off those seeds. It's so much easier just to throw them in the green waste and forget about it. Next, for any of the sort of juvenile but sizable plants, something that does have a decent root system to it, that I actually put into a bit of a compost unit. I have one of those tumbler ones. If you're doing something like you have the DIY black bin ones, just something that makes sure it actually does get a fair bit of heat in it. That's what I'll chuck those in, just to make sure that it does die off and that it's not just then going to set root and actually continue to grow in the compost, which is something that used to happen to me because I mostly only really do cold compost. And then anything that is really young, a lot of just the weed seedlings that you're pulling out, I just chuck these in a bucket, and usually because with these you're also going to be pulling out a fair bit of other mulch, organic matter, soil, and I want to try and reclaim as much of that as I can. That is then what's going to go into the compost, because that stuff usually isn't going to have enough life force, enough energy or sugars already stored in it to then be able to hold on long enough to start to grow in the compost. It usually is just going to die and be fine. And dealing with your weeds like that, I think, is a pretty good way to make sure that you're reclaiming as much of those nutrients as possible without really setting yourself up with having to potentially deal with some catastrophic issues that I definitely haven't had to deal with, where you accidentally infest an entire garden bed with a whole bunch of weed seeds. Now that we've harvested anything that's ready to come out, we've added water to anything that needs watering, we've removed our weeds in any high priority areas. Next in our garden priority system, our GPS. Oh my God, GPS. We've invented a garden navigation system. Next in our GPS, I guess, is HARP. Plant, sow, and replace anything that needs it. See, I actually use the acronym myself. Now, it probably feels really funny and unintuitive to leave actually planting stuff that you're gonna grow so far down on the priority list, but stuff takes a lot longer to grow than it does to plant. You can really stress less about leaving parts of the garden bed bare and not growing. There's basically no gardener that I've ever run into that doesn't regularly leave entire patches of the garden bare for months on end for various reasons. Either they're just letting the bed rejuvenate or they just haven't gotten around to planting it yet. You will go through times in your life of being busier and less busy, and it's perfectly fine to make your garden a bit lower maintenance by just not planting anything. Especially because this list ends up being a little bit self-policing, where if you're struggling to get the time to just water and weed and harvest your existing plants, then of course you don't have time to look after something additional in the garden. And if you get a bit lazy with seed sowing, well, that's what seedlings from nurseries are for. You don't have to stress too much about keeping up on some super rigorous schedule. You probably just need to mark out on the calendar a couple of your key crops that you really want to grow each year, make sure that you're getting those, and then the rest of the garden you can be a little bit looser with, missing ideal planting windows by a couple of weeks or so. My garlic last year, I planted about 2 months later than its ideal planting window, and I still got plenty of good garlic out of the patch. This patch of garden bed's probably gonna be bare for a good month and a half because I'm just gonna wait until my spring crops are ready to transplant into it. One tip I found that helps me a lot with keeping up with starting my seeds so that I always have seedlings ready to go is make sure you have your own personal core group of veggies that you're always going to gravitate towards just wanting to fill up garden beds with. For us, we use a lot of broccoli, lettuce, kale, beetroot, and onions. So if I only have a limited amount of time and brain space to start seeds, I'll probably be making sure that I have at least a tray of that sort of stuff on the go. And then I actually start a lot of my seeds at nighttime because that's something I can do out under lights, under the deck, and then I bring them inside for the first couple of weeks while I'm waiting for them to germinate and then bring them out into the garden. So that the limited time of daylight that I have, I can actually spend out in the garden looking after the garden itself, not just starting seeds. And the last one in our garden priority system, I'm totally gonna keep calling it GPS, is, all right, it's probably the biggest stretch of the acronym, and it's straighten up, which is clean up the garden. This is now when we can add in additional garden beds if that's something that we have time for. It's also doing all of our structural work with things like trellises and doing a lot more of our aesthetic and kind of landscapey jobs. Like recently I have extended the edged off and mulch part of my garden so that this now actually looks a bit better. I only do that when I have time to get to it. I would much rather make sure that I'm actually able to keep growing stuff and getting stuff in the ground and keeping existing stuff alive then making it look nice, which is why sometimes on camera, you'll see there's a lot of mess around this sort of area where I'll do things like quickly pull out a bunch of weeds, throw them on the ground. Maybe I have just been doing some mulching and I leave the bags near the camera. There's always tons of mess around my garden, and I appreciate that it makes it into the videos. There's so much mess around, and that's the reason why, is that because ultimately making it look nice isn't that important unless you have people coming around for a barbecue. And you can't let those rival dads rag on your unclean garden. And to add on to straighten up, one thing that I've worked out over the last couple of years is that if you can set aside maybe a day or a weekend of one big block of garden cleanup and maintenance and preventative maintenance, you can really make the whole rest of your year a lot easier and a lot lower maintenance. This wasn't meant to be a plug, but that's also basically what the last video was, is the stuff that you can do pre-spring, which is in Australia right now. That is basically all of those of activities. But the decisions you make when gardening around what to plant and where to add new beds, it's already hard enough. And this system, when you lay it out with the harps, does seem really simple, almost to the point of being dumb. But thinking like this, it's crazy the amount of mental clarity that it can give you when working out what to do in the week to week, so that you can focus on the more difficult decisions of gardening. If you want to see a deleted scene from this video and an alternate acronym you might prefer, or if you want to get bonus garden tips or even just support the channel, you can consider checking out the Patreon. Thank you so much to the Patreon members for supporting this channel. Those extra couple dollars a month really do help out the channel to a crazy extent. If you can't jump on the Patreon, you can still do me a big one-click favor and give me a green thumbs up or click subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to get your first 12 months of craft seed using the link in the description. I will see you next time.